Chris Mikowski of Emerging Civil War behind the camera, and in front of the camera with us we have Ed Lowe and Jim Doncaster. Jim is with the Knoxville Civil War Roundtable, and Ed is working on a book on Knoxville for the Emerging Civil War series. It's November, which means it's Knoxville season. So tell us, Ed, I'll have you start. Why is Knoxville something we should be paying attention to?
Well, I think you look at what Longstreet was doing up here. Braxton Bragg and Jeff Davis send Longstreet up here to take care of Ambrose Burnside, who was kind of boarding his way in East Tennessee, and they recognize the importance of East Tennessee as well. And so Davis and Bragg, hey, send Longstreet out of here, and maybe for reasons, maybe just to get rid of Longstreet out of Bragg's hair for a reason. But Longstreet heads up here in early November, and then we have the Battle of Fort Sanders on November 29th. And I can let Jim talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, actually, today is what, the 15th, and we're on the eve of part of the campaign, part of the Knoxville campaign on the 16th. Burnside masterfully took to the field and commanded his troops.
Wait, I gotta stop you right there, because Burnside and masterfully are not words we normally associate with each other.
One of the interesting things about the Knoxville campaign is that it's probably the nadir of Longstreet's career and the zenith of Burnside's. Burnside took command here. He went out into the field as Longstreet was moving towards Knoxville, took command of the 5,000 troops that he had stationed to the west and south here, and was gradually falling back. On the day that today's 159th anniversary of the day they were in Lenore Station, the next day, tomorrow, they would be at Campbell Station, where Burnside made the crossroads before Longstreet and was able to make a stand and tactically withdraw by holding Longstreet at arm's length and fall back.
Burnside comes down from Knoxville loud and says, "Hey, we can support Grant, who's in Chattanooga, the very best by, drawing Longstreet away from Chattanooga and towards Knoxville." And what Jim was saying, and that's exactly what he did. And Grant sends him a note after the Battle of Campbell Station saying, "You are doing exactly what I want you to do, Burnside, keeping Longstreet out of my hair and pushing him towards Knoxville."
Because there's that fear that Longstreet from Knoxville could fall back and basically come up behind part of Grant's army, and Sherman's kind of down there unprotected, and Longstreet could show up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Burnside continued back towards Knoxville. On the 17th and 18th, he dispatched William Sanders out on the Kingston Pike, what was Kingston Road at that time, to make a stand, because his head of engineering, Orlando Poe, was trying to finish fortifications in Knoxville. Sanders made a stand on the 17th. Kershaw attacked him, but didn't break his lines, pulled up short. On the 18th, Sanders was there again and was mortally wounded that day. His men fell back into the defense works in Knoxville, and that began the siege that Ed talked about. From the 18th, actually there were about 10 days of relatively quiet as reconnoitering of the lines went on. There was one action during that period, and it was south of the river. On the 25th of November, Law and Robertson, who had been sent by Longstreet to cross over the river, along with Parker's battery under E.P. Alexander, who was over on Cherokee Heights. They attacked what was called Armstrong Hill to see if in fact they could get into the city via the south side of the river. The brigade there under Cameron, Daniel Cameron, was able to fight them off, and there were about a couple hundred casualties on each side. An engagement that was akin to Campbell Station, but it's one that's pretty much lost to history. That was the only action then until, as Ed said, on the 29th came the Longstreet's big attempt to take the city by attacking what they considered to be the most vulnerable point at the newly christened Fort Sanders, named after William Sanders, who fell out on the Kingston Road. That was a misbegotten plan. Longstreet and his lieutenants had been reconnoitering the lines. They had watched men move in and out of the fort, not realizing that those men were on planks over a ditch that was far deeper than they had realized. McLaw's men were the ones that were assigned the assault on that northwest bastion of the defense works of Knoxville. About 4,000 of them were involved in the assault on the fort. There were no more than 400 men in the fort at the time. There was a artillery barrage went on for about 20 minutes under E.P. Alexander before the actual infantry assault at Fort Sanders. The men quickly closed. They could actually mass fairly close to the fort itself. That was why the point was chosen as the attack point, and they were quickly into a barrier that they hadn't foreseen. That it is an entanglement of wires, telegraph wire that Orlando
strung between stumps.
Strung between stumps there that when Poe, the engineering officer, got here, somebody from the town came up to him and said, "We got this warehouse full of telegraph wire. Can you do anything with it?" Well, he decided that it would make a great barrier for an attacking force. So he strung it between the stumps that lay before Fort Sanders, and it was imperceptible at a distance, and the McLaw's men didn't see it. The first lines hit it, fell down, hit it, fell down, finally made the ditch. When they realized it was deeper than they thought, they jumped in, and they didn't have scaling ladders. The walls were fairly slippery. The berm had been cut away, so you were looking at a wall, about a 70-degree wall that was icy, wet, and about 18 feet high. And they did their best, climbed up the sides. Men stood on men's shoulders. They hacked their way up. The men that made the parapet, and three flags. I think it was the 13th and 16th.
Two from Mississippi, one from Georgia.
And one from Georgia were actually planted on the parapet, all of which were captured by the men inside. And the flag bearers either killed or captured. Yeah. There were 3 Medals of Honor awarded to men inside the fort. It was over in about 20 minutes. It was one of the most one-sided affairs in the whole war. Yeah. There were 813 casualties on the Confederate side and 13 on the Union side.
So, Ed, Jim described it as misbegotten. What's your reaction? How do you assess that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at after the initial assault, McLaw's one of his aides goes to Longstreet and says, "Hey, we need to call this attack off." When others like Bushrod Johnson were calling for additional, "Hey, we can do this. One more attack, and I think we got it." But Longstreet trusted this aide and said, "No, we're going to stop it right here." And it wasn't shortly thereafter, and Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, that he gets word of what happened in Chattanooga. You know, Missionary Ridge falls on November 25th, and word begins to infiltrate up there to the Knoxville area that Bragg has met with a big defeat down in that area, and that Longstreet should make every effort to try and join Bragg if he can in Dalton, which he does initially, but The mountain routes are too arduous, and Longstreet said, no, we can't do that. Maybe we better make our way back up towards Virginia. And Grant actually sends 2 messengers. One he expects to fall into Confederate hands saying, hey, reinforcements, Burnside, are on the way. Stand fast. And Longstreet gets wind of that and says, hey, we maybe better skedaddle out of Knoxville. And he does so on December 4th, I believe.
Exactly.
And heads back up towards towards Virginia. And you've got the winter campaign. Longstreet actually submits his resignation at the end of December because of everything that's going on and with the command climate and the challenges of supplies and Bragg and everything. But Davis rejects that petition, and but then McLaws is court-martialed because of that for failing to provide ladders, and Evander Law gets into some trouble, and Jerome Robertson becomes at the sites of Longstreet. So it's not a good time for Longstreet's First Corps as far as command goes. Very difficult times.
So, Jim, not much left of the battlefield today, but a couple preservation successes here.
Yeah, we have one fort left, Fort Dickerson. All of the forts around Knoxville were named for fallen officers during the campaign. Fort Dickerson sits south of the river. It was one of 3 forts, Stanley, Dickerson, and Higley. Higley was built or hastily formed. It was really some artillery pieces that were formed or brought by Poe and Burnside after the Armstrong Hill affair. But of those, all of those actually, because of the rugged terrain south of the river, there hasn't been much development. So Fort Dickerson is a city park. It's an earthen fort. It's very much like the Fort Sanders that gave way to urban development. But all that's left at Fort Sanders are some monuments, one to the 79th New York, another to the Confederate soldiers put up by the United Daughters of the Confederacy for the fallen men that had attacked the fort there.
So, Ed, I'll give you the last word here. What's the legacy of the Knoxville campaign? Why don't we know it better?
I think in 2 parts. One, you take a look at the U.S. side. Take a look at Burnside, the reputation he had coming out of Fredericksburg, your talk tonight. Both houses of Congress commended Burnside for his actions in Knoxville. He did a very reputable job here in maintaining East Tennessee for Lincoln. And on Longstreet's side, I think I go back to a conversation he had with Bragg on November 11th, which is kind of which was the basis of the title of the book, A Fine Opportunity Lost, because he's looking at all the supply challenges that his command is having in this area with foraging, they came down from Virginia with basically pretty much nothing what they could carry on their backs. That was it. That's all they had. And so he wrote to Bragg saying, up around the Sweetwater area, just north of Chattanooga, he basically said, looking ahead, I think all this is going to be is just another fine opportunity lost. And how prophetic that was, because that's what it was. And the title of the book is A Fine Opportunity Lost, because he goes through the winter of 63, 64, rejoins Lee at the end of April of 64. And then, of course, we have the Overland Campaign starting about the Wilderness. Longstreet is wounded, and he doesn't rejoin Lee until October. So, a lot of people that I've spoken with, they see Longstreet at Gettysburg, and then suddenly he reemerges at the Battle of the Wilderness. And what did he do for those 10 months? Well, Chickamauga, Chattanooga, and East Tennessee. So that's really what this is about. So,
Jim, Ed, thank you both for your time tonight, and happy Knoxville anniversary.